because you had a chance to see Shane Wright more than once throughout this season and through the playoffs. And is there any doubt in your mind still about this guy and if he'll be taken by the Canadiens first overall?
I don't. I think he's still going to go first overall. Again, it would have been nice to see him make a long run in the OHL playoffs and maybe go to the Memorial Cup like Hamilton is about to do right now, which could be great exposure for guys like Jack-Eye and Mishak to kind of raise their kind of status within the organization as far as, keep an eye on these guys because they're going to such all the eyes on junior hockey is going to be on the Memorial Cup every year. So you always see some guys that are, drafted or assigned as undrafted guys that get that opportunity to play on that big stage in the Memorial Cup because it is, the Stanley Cup of junior hockey. So it would have been nice to see Shane Wright get to that this year, but you have to look at it. You can only go as far as your team, how great your team is. You look at guys like Connor McDavid, he never won a Memorial Cup, and one player can only get you so far, especially in junior hockey. And Shane Wright did all he could this year. He had a great second half of the year. He ended up finishing with 94 points, 63 games, only 22 penalty minutes. So he's a guy that doesn't take a lot of penalties. He's a very disciplined hockey player. He has a great head on his shoulders. He's not going to get too rattled about things. And again, a 1.49 point per game average is nothing to be upset about, especially considering his first half wasn't that great. But you go into the playoffs, and his Kingston team, like I mentioned, just was not deep enough, I believe, to make any sort of run. Their defense wasn't what it needed to be, and their goaltending wasn't up to snuff, especially when they came up against a team like North Bay, who really steamrolled them in 5 games after they had some trouble with the Oshawa Generals, who were a very flawed team when Oshawa took Kingston to 6 games. So it wasn't like Kingston really had an easy road at all. And when you have guys like Martin Chromiak, who's a top end draft pick of the LA Kings, and Shane Wright, it's difficult, right? Because you have to rely on those guys at all points, and you're double shifting them. You're playing them for the whole 2 minutes of power plays at times with Shane Wright exclusively. And he had 14 points in those 11 games. So he still had an over a point per game average, but I think people were expecting him to kind of be a guy that was a catalyst to kind of get them up to maybe face a team like Hamilton in the Eastern Conference Final and maybe go on to face Windsor in the OHL Championship. But again, there was only so much that he could do, and I think that he did what he had to do, but just did not get the help from his teammates. And he'll be the first one to admit that he didn't do a good enough job, because that's the kind of player that he is. He always wants to talk about his teammates. When I had spoken to Jimmy Gilchrist, the longtime voice of the Kingston Frontenacs, he always talked about that early in the year. He was very upset that people wanted to just talk about him. He wanted to talk about the team. He wanted to talk about his teammates, and he really just didn't want the attention to be all on him. He wanted to focus on hockey, and I think that was what kind of hurt him at the beginning of the season, was trying to be able to deal with all of that pressure and expectation and the eyes that were on him going in as the first overall pick. So I think Shane Wright had a good year, especially the second half. And again, like I keep mentioning, he didn't have any penalty minutes in the playoffs. So again, a very disciplined player, a very smart player. You got to see him when he played against Niagara, which obviously wasn't a good team this year, but he made a couple of nice plays and gave you a few flashes of what you can expect from a guy that's a elite playmaker at the next level. And even Jimmy Gilchrist, the voice of the Kingston Frontenacs, said he would be completely shocked if Shane Wright was back in Kingston next year and in junior hockey, because he thinks he's that NHL ready with his two-way game. That's going to take some time, I think, on the offensive side, but defensively, I think he's going to be a very solid two-way centerman if the Montreal Canadiens decide to take him first overall, which I think he's still ranked at, and he should still be the first pick.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, because that's new information of any kind is helpful for any fans that are just curious about what the future looks like for this Canadiens team, and if they're going to take him, and what they can expect. And my last question with Shane Wright, I guess, would be, fans seem to forget, or some folks in general, whether it's scouts as well, seem to forget that he missed an entire year of development. So for what we're seeing from him, still being relatively impressive, I would say, was missing that year. Is that really what's even bringing more doubt maybe to people, is that he missed an entire season? Like, do you think it would be worth considering bringing him back for another year of junior just because of that? Or do you really think that it's not necessary based on what you've gathered?
I think he could go back for another year. But when you're the first overall pick, you expect them to be with the team next year, which the Buffalo Sabres sent Will Power back to college, and he went and played for Michigan University last year. So it can be done where you send the first overall pick back. I don't think they necessarily have to play in that first year, like you kind of see in other sports, like football, where the first pick has to play automatically. I think in hockey, taking a slow, especially. I guess you could say, especially when the Habs are in a rebuild right now, they don't really need Shane Wright to play right away, and they're not trying to compete right away. So if being on a team that's not going to win a lot of games next year isn't going to be great for Shane Wright's development, why not send him back to junior and see if Kingston can put some pieces around him to kind of go for a Memorial Cup run, because obviously they came up short this year. But I would say that Shane Wright, I like the fact that that he's not, one of those selfish players. I do think that he's one of those players where he tries to make those other teammates around him better, and I do think that having him go back for another year wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. I think that second year of development, like you kept mentioning, Connor McDavid spoke about that when he was drafted. That second year that he had was very big in the Ontario Hockey League, especially for guys that are granted exceptional status. You got to remember that if they're coming into the league at 15 years old, guys like Shane Wright and Connor McDavid, John Tavares, they're granted exceptional status at a very young age. So they have that they're still teenagers. They're still very young people at that point to try to get into that OHL mode and trying to learn junior hockey when the other teams are going to go after them. He had a great exceptional status year, and I think missing out on last year was a very big thing. And now this being his draft year, I think there was a lot of pressure on him to go in there and compete, considering he had missed the last year, like you mentioned. So he didn't go play in Europe. He didn't go play in any of these other leagues. So really it took him a while to kind of get going, and he had all that pressure on him, right, being in his draft year. So I do think that second year of development that he missed out would be something that maybe the team looks at and says, let's send him back and he can go play the third year of his OHL career that he really should have had if the season wasn't canceled with the pandemic.
I don't think it could hurt. I mean, I don't know if he has. Some people feel like he may not have much more to learn at that level, so maybe that's why they want to take him to the next level and just have him start developing parts of his game that will get him NHL ready, I guess. So